Hey folks, this is Nick at Bootstrap Farmer. If you have a grow rack on the way, or if you're wondering what it looks like to get it delivered, this is what's going to show up at the end of your driveway. The contract with the truck drivers states that it gets off the truck and it gets put as close to the curb line as possible. And there's not a whole lot we can do about that as of yet. So just expect that this crate is what you're going to get. Okay, so once it's off the truck, you're going to take off the protective wrap. And what the protective wrap looks like is shrink wrap from head to toe around the pallet. There is a cardboard backer that protects the surge protector, the timers, the wires, that kind of thing on the control panel side. It's furthermore strapped down to the pallet. You'll notice that the reservoir is also strapped down. And for a lot of folks that order their microgreen trays with the pallet, check that box. They're almost always inside there. If they're not inside there, that means that there's too many to fit on the pallet and they're gonna come in a separate box. So if you order just a few, so let's say a 30 pack, check that before you let us know that they're not there, because that's more than often the chance. So we're gonna take off the shrink wrap, and then we're going to take off these wood leg supports. So I'm gonna start with taking off the cellophane wrap. So once the cellophane wrap is off, you're gonna be able to really see how the rack is. And I want you to really take a look and note damage on the rack. And what you'll do is you'll pull out your phone and you'll take pictures of anything of any concern. You're gonna do this when the delivery driver is there, before you sign any pieces of paper. So take this shrink wrap off. Do not send them back, because there's just not a way to get them back here. What we'll have to do is send you repair parts. This happens 1 out of every 100 racks, if that. So it doesn't happen that often, but this is the time to note any damage and then mark it on the paperwork and send us the pictures to contact@bootstrapfarmer.com. So now that the cellophane wrap is off, we can start taking off the cardboard. Everything looks fine. And so what you see is all of the wires are connected. All the fans are connected. There's no issues. The rack is all in one piece. There's no damage to the top. A lot of times, if we have damage, it's because something gets set on top of those in freight. Again, it doesn't happen that much, but let's take a look there. All of the cords are in place. All of the lights are intact. Everything's all good. This is a completely undamaged rack. Next, we are going to cut these straps and take off these wood supports. So watch your eyeballs. As you can see, that stuff will fly around. Now, these are nailed down at the bottom, so you may need a crowbar or a hammer or something like that, but really they'll just pull right off. Watch it, because there are nails. Don't step on those. And now the rack is free, and you can pull it off of the pallet. So we'll start by getting the rack ready to move. We'll remove the reservoir. I just want to check inside of it. This is where your trays are going to be. The pump is inside the reservoir. The aerator lines are in the reservoir. And we always put extra zip ties and clips for the hoses, just in case we wanted you to have some spare parts. If you ordered anything else like trays, humidity domes, that type of thing, they're more than likely going to be shipped inside the reservoir. But for now, just put the lid back on and we'll put that to the side. And now we're going to just kind of still take a look at the lines, make sure everything's attached. The reason we use flexible tubing is in transit, these guys are going to get banged around, knocked about, and with the flexible line, we don't have that problem. So the aerator is already pre-installed with the wires and everything, so it rides on this bottom shelf. So now we're just going to unlock the wheels and roll this guy off. It's really pretty light, so 9 out of 10 folks are going to be able to do this on their own. And now it can roll wherever you need it to go. So let's get a close-up of some of the individual components. This is a 5-tier rack, our most common one that we sell. So you're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 flood trays on a 6-shelf rack. This top shelf has to support the lights, but a lot of people use that for storage or germination. And so we have 2 lines. The one on the right is going to be the supply line. We're going to go from the top down. Each one has a quarter turn valve. You can adjust the water that way, the different water volumes, and then you can shut off each one independently for different crop needs or germination needs, depending on your grow and your operation. If we come on down, this is the inline filter that you can pull out and wash out. That's good for catching seeds or stems or root matter or media matter. This line tucks on top of the reservoir, which we'll show you here in a little bit. This is the supply line. This is one of the very few connections you'll have to actually make. And this is the fill flush valve. So I like to flush it. During normal rack operation, this will always be turned off, and all of these will be turned on. So the water comes up the pump, through the filter, up through the supply lines. And if you're going to drain your rack for maintenance, you'll simply, while the pump is off, turn that supply line off, this one on, and you can run it out. And we have this male hose end, so if you're have an indoor grow, you can put on whatever size hose you need and go to a sink or a drain or outside or out the window or whatever you need to do. So that way you can flush and fill your tank. And then we'll show you how to hook this up to the pump in just a second. When you first get your rack, make sure that the flush fill valve is off. When this is connected to the pump and there's water in the reservoir and everything, you're going to leave this line completely open. And to set the volume going to each flood tray, all of these, all the way up, are going to be turned off. And you're barely going to crack the bottom one. As this one starts to fill, that means you've worked all the air bubbles out of this. The next time that you open this up, now water's going to be coming up here and pre-filling up to the valves. Once this is done and you quit seeing air bubbles come out, you're then going to barely open this one again until you see this run clear without any bubbles. And you're going to do that all the way up, barely turning these on. And to get more pressure, you may have to open these slightly or close these slightly until each one is filling at roughly the same rate. Now keep in mind, this one is always going to fill first and it's always going to drain last. This one's going to fill second, drain second, and on and on. This one will take a little bit longer to fill. The top one's going to take a little bit longer to fill than the bottom one. That's completely okay. Looking at the rack from this side, we see two drain lines. This is the fill. It has the one with the shorter screen on there. And all it does is slip on and off for easy maintenance. Now, the drain line has this extension with a hole drilled in it and a screen. And what that allows is a tray, Bootstrap Farmer shallow microgreen tray, exactly fits to that drain line, just barely to the lip of the tray. So it's not going to go over it. As the water comes in, it's going to go up this ramp through these lines, and it's going to enter either the mesh bottom tray or the trays with holes, bottom fill. The pump is going to shut off in about 15 minutes, and we'll show you how to time that out here in a little bit. Once that shut off, it'll slowly drain, and that every single day, once a day, it's going to fill up your trays with the perfect amount of water, depending on where you're at, how hot it is, how humid it is. You may have to do a second or a third watering, especially if this is inside of a very hot area like a garage or a greenhouse, but that's going to be up to you to determine, and we'll show you how to do that in just a second. But just know that as it stands, this drain line is going to perfectly fill a Bootstrap Farmer shallow microgreen tray or a deep tray with the cell plugs in it. Now this little hole is something we do here at the warehouse before we send it out, and this lets the reservoir down here completely drain out as much as it possibly can. There's always going to be a little bit of water. Don't fret about that, because every day that's going to flush in and out, and you're going to have to do some maintenance on this weekly, bi-weekly. That's up for you to determine. It's also going to be determined by what type of soil media you use. So if you use soil or core, you're going to have to clean this more often than if you do rock wool. All right, so here's the heart of the operation. This is the surge protector. On-off switch. This cord goes down. It's 15 foot, so you have lots of room. It's got 3 timers. This timer that doesn't have anything on it is going to be where you plug in the pump, those extra zip ties we talked about. Once you figure out what side your pump is going to be on, and I'll show you how to do that in a second, you're going to run the cord up, zip tie that, same way you would do any of these and plug that directly into this timer. You could either run it to the back or in the front, but you are kind of limited by this aerator, which is always going to be on, and this is the fan pack, which we also suggest staying on 24 hours a day. If you don't want it on, you could set it to the same 12 on, 12 off by putting it to this plug in the back. So you got a little bit of options there. These two timers with the white cords and with the lights, the 5-tier is going to have this extra box on there to account for more lights. The 3 and the 4 will not have this, it'll be directly plugged in. So to set the timer and to set any of these is, let's just say it's noon where you're at, the sun on the bright side is 12 noon, and you just simply turn to where this arrow says noon or 1 o'clock or 11 o'clock, whatever the case may be. So if you wanted to run the pump at 6 o'clock in the morning, you would pull this notch out. One notch is 15 minutes, and that's where I suggest you start. If you were in a greenhouse or a very hot operation and you needed to run this multiple times a day, you could decide how often that needed to be, pull out individual pins for 15 minutes at a time and adjust accordingly. Anything past 15 minutes, if the water is adjusted right, it's not going to get any more wet. In fact, it does have the opportunity to be more saturated, could have some mold problems, so I would water it as infrequently as possible while keeping your media wet. To set the timers, I suggest you start at 12 on, 12 off. If you're going to be working at night, or if you want to save when electricity is oftentimes cheaper at night, you could turn these all off or on, depending on what that case may be. If you're going to be working on it during the day, you could have those on and use this as working light. It's totally up to you. So you do have some options there. If you wanted to turn off, let's say you were furloughing a rack for whatever reason, maybe you didn't need as much production that week, you do have the ability to shut off individual rows with these switches on the side. There's going to be 5 switches on a 5-tier. They're going to operate any one rack. So a few things to check if any of these components are not working. So number one, make sure this rack is plugged in. If it's plugged in and this switch is not lighting up for off and on, it's not plugged on right now, obviously. But if you're getting light to this, electricity is coming to it. If it's not on, check your breaker. If you've got GFCI plug, make sure that the reset is tripped, and make sure that you have electricity to the source. So that should bring it to here. You also, if your lights are not on, you do have a constant on, a constant off, or a timer option on the tops of these timers individually. And then remember to check these switches, make sure that they're on or off. Moving around to the other side, the fans are coming through, they're plugged in here. Here's their supply box, and they are pigtailed to one another all the way down. So if the top one's working, all the rest of them should be working. If you have fans that aren't going, all you have to do is make sure that these connections are in all the way. Sometimes they work themselves loose during transit. Other than that, you're good to go. So once you have this in whatever room of your house or operation that you're happy with, one thing of note, if you're moving this to a greenhouse that has a dirt floor, make sure you put some kind of blocks or something on the wheels so they don't sink down. Now, the floor is going to be saturated over time, and you don't want that guy to tip over. So let's start by hooking up the aerator. So you'll take this line that comes with. I like to find the middle by putting the ends together. Give a little snip, and you can adjust this more or less later. And I like to come about 6 inches out and snip it again. Now, this is what I'm going to plug into the box itself, which I'll show you in a second. These are backfill preventers, so just in case something turns off, water doesn't get sucked back into the aerator, there's an indicator on here. Probably can't see it, but there's an arrow pointing this way. So I'm going to make sure that, put it in such a way that the air is going that way. Okay, so at the ends of those lines are the 2 air stones. Each one of those lines, before the air stones get in or put in, you're going to run it up through the bottom of the tray. There's the backflow preventers that we talked about. You're going to pull those up, And we're going to run these off to the side. And I like to just put them in between there so they're a little protected. The aerator itself, make sure it's not twisted up, but the aerator is going to live right there at the bottom of the rack. We're going to plug the 2 lines in, and you can adjust the amount of air. I would set it for as far as it can go. There's a little dial here. I know you can see it, but put that all the way. I would leave it loose until this is under there, so we'll take a look at that here in a second. Okay, so those aerator lines are in place. We're going to take the packaging off of the pump. So these little suction cups are at the bottom. You're going to place it just a little bit past the middle, press it down, then you're going to undo this wire. The wire, just like the aerator stones, are going to come from the inside up through this back hole in the reservoir, through the racking, and it's going to wind itself on the other side. You can zip tie it and plug into that timer on the right. So I do suggest keeping everything loose. Don't tie anything down just yet. Pull all the slack out so you have plenty of room. You're going to get these clips out. You're going to get the zip ties out, any packaging materials. So the only thing that's going to be down here at the bottom is the pump itself, which is completely submergible. When you clean out your reservoir, after you pump it out with the flush fill valve, you can slide this out, give it a good scrubbing, do the final drain, all that kind of thing. And the reason you want to pull the water out and get it out is because 38 gallons of water is going to be a little heavy, and that will allow you to pull this out without any damage to yourself or any of the equipment. So one of the other things that you'll clean is you'll simply pull on this cover, check the impeller, make sure everything's unplugged when you do this, and just make sure there's no obstructions or anything you need to get. And then this filter will actually come out, and you can wash this, get any roots or any seeds or anything that got caught in there. Put that back in, and simply snap that back into place. You'll notice that the hose is sticking straight up. Now that you got all of your lines ran through there, snap that back into place. And the reason all this is on this side is, number one, because the aerator is plugged in on here. Number two, that's where you want to plug your pump. You're going to slide this in. And that hose, we left plenty of room in there for you to snip it to go right into the pump. And so once that's in, you'll open this box back up, you'll snip the hose to length, and you'll use one of these, put it on the pump. So once you have the pump secure, the lid's back on, the lines are loose, now it's time to put this into place so you can run your drain lines. And there's 2 lines, and there's 2 holes. The very bottom one is going to drain independently. You have a lot of flexibility here. So you're going to place that in. You're going to place that drain line in there. And the reason there's 2 is this one drains out so much more slow that it just needs its own drain line, and that allows this to drain off a little bit more evenly. So filter is accessible. This is going to come to just right about here. Make sure that that flush fill valve is completely off. This one is on. And I like to fill up my rack at the house from right here. I don't like to use the front flush fill. I don't like to push it back through the pump. It's not going to hurt it, but I prefer to fill it from here. Once you're done, put that back in. This is a primerless pump, so once you've got your timer set, you verified the lights are on, the fans are on, you can make sure that the aerator is bubbling. And those lines, I like to leave them a little long so they kind of move around in there, keep things stirred up. But once the pump comes on, remember, you're going to keep all these barely open. I can't stress that enough until you adjust each one independently of itself. Other than that, maintenance, flush fill the valve, clean the 2 filters, scrub everything, use peroxide or your cleaner of choice, rub these down. You can also take out these screens and kind of visually check everything, make sure there's no residue built up, make sure there's no roots built up, kind of clean those holes, spray it down with your favorite cleaner, rub it dry, keep all this stuff out. That's pretty much it. So if you have any questions, contact bootstrapfarmer.com. We'll be happy to help. Other than that, enjoy your new rack.